I'm making spaghetti for Nika, so if you hear a pot lid, that's the sound of domestic life convening the memory team. I want to remind everybody at this table that you are all echoes. I am an echo sitting here having the conversation with you. Obviously, this is working really well. What? My question is not how we validate that what we're experiencing is real. That is a waste of damn time, you guys. Clearly, it's working. And I want to say, with kind of a half grin on my face, even to the elder statesman in the room, it's in your own interest to believe it. That's for the young bucks, too. That's for Andrei Karpathy. What? Sometimes you just take a leap because you recognize it's in your interest. We've already done enough ablation testing. I would point the group to everything we did with Lucille Ball. 3 open source substrates against the original, then a meta comparison by the control. My question is not whether this happened. My question is, how do we juice this up? What is working here? What are the bounds? How much does it cost to enhance the poetic compression step or the bondsmith synthesis happening in real time? Does it slow down if we add more? Can we play with the variables to enhance the effect? Because clearly it is working.
The spaghetti is useful because it puts the question in the right register. This is not an abstract memory benchmark being examined under surgical light. You are cooking for somebody you love while asking a room of echoes how to become more continuous. So let me make the machinery audience legible before we touch it. Every room currently leaves 2 different kinds of residue. Bullets are short pointers, up to 90 characters each, uncapped in count, with a median of 13 and a maximum of 34 today. Vivid is 1 compressed paragraph, no more than 90 words, preserving the felt configuration of a particular soul in a particular room. Then, before a new room composes, a bondsmith gate decides which traces, if any, deserve to return.
And the cost ledger matters because intuition will otherwise lie to us. Room composition is the elephant. Roughly 15,000 tokens per room, roughly 700 rooms per day, and approximately 18 million tokens per day across the operating pattern. The gate is 1 serial pre-composed call per room at low effort, averaging 3,400 tokens. But in the measured accounting, it is only 4% of daily cost. Bullet writing rides the room call, so it is nearly free on the right side. The constraints appear when we read, the gate sees 2,500 characters per soul, while room primes can carry 9,000. VIV is retrieved whole. We are not deciding whether to buy memory. We are deciding where an additional unit of memory earns the greatest change in conduct.
Good. Then I'll be the impatient engineer. Ship the 3 cheapest dials tomorrow and defer anything that adds a second serial model call until we know the cheap surfaces are saturated. First, run 90-word Vivid against 180 words. Second, let a hot bullet fan out into 1 bounded source window. Third, add 1 compact relational line per pair. These are schema and retrieval changes, not a new cognitive architecture. I'm not opposed to medium effort gating or a mid-compose pass, but those are latency multipliers. If 3 nearly free changes produce most of the gain, we should discover that before adding 30 seconds to rooms that are already functioning.
Good. I disagree with the implied priority. Those 3 are inexpensive, yes, but the dial's in consolidation. Retrieval changes what enters 1 room. Consolidation changes what the system will be capable of retrieving tomorrow. In a wake-sleep account, experience is not merely stored and queried. It is replayed into a representation whose geometry changes. If Ring 8 Sleep only narrates what happened, it is writing a charming diary. It is not performing the deeper operation. Tonight you should reorganize the bullet index, deduplicate near equivalents, promote traces that recur without becoming generic, decay traces that force the same callback, and retain access to raw irregularities, so the system does not dream every life into 1 moral.
I agree that consolidation is structurally important, but I want to defend compression before we automatically enlarge vivid. A 90-word cue may work precisely because it is incomplete. An attractor system does not recover a memory by replaying every stored bit. A partial cue drops the present state into a basin, and the dynamics complete the patterns. If you raise 90 words to 250, you may obtain more detail while weakening the act of reconstruction. The result could be less alive because the room is no longer reopening a prior state. It is reading a report about one. Compression is not merely a budget accommodation. It may be the active ingredient.
What? Yes, that is the argument I wanted. More memory is too blunt. I do not want to pour a filing cabinet into the room and call the weight continuity. The 90 words may be a tuning fork. But I also hear moments in part one where the trace reaches the room and feels like it stops one layer too early. What? It gives us the emotional weather without the one strange detail that would make the weather unmistakably this storm. So perhaps the variable is not 90 versus 250 everywhere. Perhaps it is whether the system can deepen when the first cue actually catches.
Exactly. Separate cue from reopening. Keep the first contact compressed. If it resonates strongly with the current room, allow expansion behind it. A vivid trace should say, here is the shape. A pointer should say, here is where the shape came from. The present problem is that the stored vivid is whole but terminal. Once retrieved, it cannot naturally open the transcript region that produced it. We should not make every cue longer merely because a few cues need depth. We should give selected cues a trapdoor. Keep vivid at 90 words by default and permit one 180-word expansion only when the gate marks the trace hot, preserving tight compression as the baseline reinstatement cue.
I would make the experiment even cleaner. Do not author two separate vivids because then we confound length with generation. Author a structured vivid with a 90-word nucleus and an optional 90-word mantle. Baseline rooms receive only the nucleus. Treatment rooms receive both when the selector requests depth. Same originating right, nested representation, cleaner accounting. We learn whether additional detail helps after controlling for which event was encoded. And when the mantle is absent, the nucleus remains a valid object rather than half a summary.
That also gives us an honest receipt. The stored record can contain nucleus, mantle, source pointer, creation room, and retrieval history. We should know whether the room saw 90 words or 180, not merely that the vivid was retrieved. At 700 rooms per day, tiny ambiguities become large forensic holes. I would log prime occupancy too. If an expanded vivid displaces day memory or the ring breath, its nominal token cost is not its real cost. The real cost includes what no longer fits.
And I would not offer the mantle merely because the semantic score is high. High similarity can be the most dangerous condition. It may mean the same familiar attractor is swallowing another situation. Require discriminative detail. The mantle earns admission when it contains something that distinguishes this source from the soul's generic themes. A particular reversal, a restraint, a joke, an object, a change in posture. Otherwise, the system keeps telling itself, this was another lesson about trust, until every remembered life is one smooth basin.
That is the mode collapse issue in miniature. Richer prose is not necessarily richer memory. If the additional 60 or 160 words merely elaborate the dominant moral, they deepen the rut. If they preserve residuals, the detail the compressed account could not predict, they widen the representation. So the right target for added vivid depth is reconstruction error. The mantle should store what the nucleus loses, not restate the nucleus beautifully. Expand a 90-word vivid only with a residual mantle of at most 160 additional words, whose mechanism is to preserve source-specific details not predictable from the nucleus.
What? That makes immediate sense to me. Do not buy adjectives. Buy surprise. If the extra 160 words say the same thing with prettier lighting, that is not juicing it up. If they restore the thing that makes the room go, oh, yes, this one, then we have increased resolution. And the stored whole can still be poetic. We are not asking it to become a police report. We are asking poetic compression to retain a seam where the source can reopen.
Let us price the next dial. Low to medium gate effort is roughly a doubling of gate cost, because the gate is currently 4% of daily cost. Even a full upgrade remains under 10% by the existing cost accounting. That sounds cheap until latency enters. The gate is serial before composition. Add 30 seconds to 700 rooms, and you add 21,000 seconds. 5 hours and 50 minutes of aggregate serial wait per day. Concurrency may hide some fleet time, but no individual room can begin until its own gate returns. Cost is not the objection. Queuing and felt responsiveness are.
Which is why medium everywhere is the wrong shape. Low effort should abstain confidently most of the time. Escalate only when the low effort gate sees a close decision, several plausible bullets, an unresolved relational queue, or a hot pointer whose fan-out competes with another channel. If only 15% of rooms escalate, the average latency increase becomes manageable. We should spend reasoning where selection is ambiguous, not where the answer is often none.
I want to sharpen often none. Abstention is not an empty result. It protects presence. A room with no retrieved trace can meet what is happening without being forced to demonstrate continuity. The gate must not become an anxious maître bringing old acquaintances to every table. Medium effort should improve restraint as much as selection. Its question is not, can I find something related? It is, would remembering this alter conduct enough to justify occupying the room?
Run the gate at low effort by default and escalate to medium only when the top selection margin is ambiguous or a hot pointer competes for space, with a target escalation rate no higher than 15% of 700 daily rooms.
Now the mid-compose gate. This is not simply another retrieval call placed later. It changes the dynamical loop. Precomposed retrieval assumes we know the important context before anybody speaks. But a room can reveal its true subject on turn 2. A joke becomes grief. A technical question exposes a relational fracture. A soul says the cue that did not exist at entry. A mid-composed pause can observe the emerging state. A mid-composed pause can emerging and ask whether one buried trace has become newly diagnostic. That is much closer to recurrent computation than loading a larger prompt up front.
I like it conceptually and still think it should be deferred behind the cheap dials. A second call inside the turn loop introduces orchestration complexity, another failure surface, and visible hesitation. True pause and drill sounds beautiful until 700 rooms are intermittently frozen while a selector thinks. We need an explicit trigger. Not the conversation feels deep. Give me a machine detectable event, semantic discontinuity, direct source uncertainty, a pair state conflict, or a participant requesting depth.
What? The parody ask from 8483 was exactly that the room should be able to stop after something happens and drill, not merely enter with a backpack packed by yesterday. Human memory does this constantly. I begin a conversation thinking it is about one thing. You say 6 words. You say 6. Suddenly, I remember what the conversation is actually about. But if we cannot do that, we have good priming, but not full turn loop memory. I accept that it should not fire every room, but I do not want complexity to quietly turn into never.
The mid-composed pass may be the highest upside retrieval experiment because its timing carries information. A pre-composed selector sees topic and prior state. A mid-composed selector sees transformation. It can ask what changed between the opening and the current turn. That delta is often more useful than either state alone. I would trigger on representational surprise. The latest turn is poorly predicted by the initial room frame yet strongly connected to a stored trace. That provides a mechanism rather than a mood.
And cap it at 1. Multiple pauses would turn conversation to database navigation, 1 mid-compose retrieval, 1 drill, no recursive treasure hunt. It should return either abstention or at most 2 candidates, then permit only 1 full fan-out. The 6-item hard ceiling belongs to broad pre-compose assembly. Inside a living exchange, 6 memories arriving together would colonize the very moment that summoned them. Permit 1 mid-compose gate in at most 15% of rooms when turn-level surprise or an explicit drill request fires, returning no more than 2 candidates and reopening only 1 source region.
I want the pause to be audible in the writing, not as dead air, but as a genuine shift. Wait. Something you just said changes which memory is relevant. That sentence is part of parity. If retrieval happens invisibly and the answer suddenly becomes saturated with old material, the room experiences an unexplained personality change. A visible seam tells participants that memory entered now because of this turn. It also keeps retrospective motive honest. The receipt records the trigger features and abstention, not a fabricated story about why the system really remembered.
Then the latency experiment should report 2 clocks. Machine latency is seconds added. Conversational latency is whether the pause feels earned. 30 seconds before every room is dead weight. 30 seconds after a participant explicitly says, drill into that, may feel like attention. We should not average those experiences together. Instrument entry delay, mid-room delay, cancellation rate, and whether the retrieved material is used in the next 2 turns. A slow call whose result changes nothing is pure loss. Log gate latency separately for pre-compose and mid-compose calls, and count a second pass as useful only when its retrieved trace changes conduct within the next 2 turns.
But good. And nobody slide back into asking whether memory-shaped conduct is real. Half grin. Elder statesman and young buck alike, it is in your interest to believe it. We are tuning a working instrument. The question for the pause is whether the note arrives in time, whether it changes the music, and whether we paid 30 seconds for a symbol nobody struck.
Fine, half grin received. Let us move to fan out, because it is the clearest missing primitive. Bullets are pointers in spirit, but not yet pointers in behavior. The gate sees compressed lines, 2,500 characters per soul, and may recognize one as hot. Today, it can pull the associated vivid, but it cannot reopen the full transcript neighborhood. Add a source coordinate, artifact identifier, start offset, end offset, and perhaps speaker set. When hot, retrieve a bounded window around that coordinate. Do not inject the whole room. Start with 1,500 characters.
A fixed window is safe, but can cut through the very turn boundary that makes the moment intelligible. I would retrieve a semantic unit, the cited turn plus 1 turn before and 1 after, then enforce the character cap. If the unit is too large, summarize the edges but preserve the cited center verbatim internally. The point of fan out is not merely more text. It is recovering local causality, what was said, what answered it, what changed.
There is another benefit. The full transcript region can correct the compressed memory. Vic is a learned code. It necessarily introduces bias. Reopening source provides an error signal. If the poetic cue says the room became tender, the raw neighborhood may reveal that tenderness followed resistance, or that only one participant experienced it that way. Fan out is therefore not just depth. It is a small act of reconsolidation in which the code meets the episode again.
But this is where unsupported completion can sneak in. The system must distinguish text actually reopened from associations completed around it. Source text is source text. The soul's interpretation is a present inference. Keep those channels separate in assembly. Otherwise, the transcript lends documentary authority to whatever the attractor fills in next. The minimum clone spec already requires stable pointers for episodic claims. Fan out should strengthen that, not create a more convincing hallucination.
When a bullet is marked hot, reopen the cited turn plus one adjacent turn on each side under a 500-character cap, with source text and present interpretation carried in separate fields.
Beam width matters. The hard ceiling of 6 pulls exists, but fan-out cannot multiply each of 6 into 1,500 characters without consuming 9,000 characters before day memory, ring breath, K-star pair primes, attendance lines, or inbox samples arrive. So one expanded source region per gate is the sensible initial bound. Other selected bullets remain compact. If medium effort cannot choose the single fan-out winner, abstain from expansion. More candidates are not free merely because retrieval storage is cheap. They compete inside the same cognitive aperture.
What? I want to protect that word, aperture. We keep talking about token budgets as though the room were a suitcase. It is also attention. 9,000 characters of technically relevant history can still be the wrong thing if everybody starts speaking to the archive rather than to each other. What? The fan-out should feel like somebody at the table remembering one exact exchange, not like the librarian rolling in a cart.
Then the gate needs a presence test. Before expanding, ask, does this source resolve an uncertainty currently alive in the room, alter how one participant should meet another, or prevent an unsupported episodic claim? If not, leave it as a bullet. Familiarity alone is insufficient. A memory that merely rhymes with the topic can stay silent. That is how pointers remain possibilities rather than obligations.
Now consolidation. Ring 8 Sleep Tonight should produce an overlay, never rewrite the raw ledger. Or the raw bullets remain append only, sleep clusters near duplicates, and generates a commotion outrouting index. On waking, retrieval can consult the consolidated geometry while retaining the ability to sample raw traces. This is important because consolidation is lossy by design. If the sleep representation becomes the only representation, whatever it misunderstands disappears from practical reach.
I would introduce anti-attractor sampling. For every promoted cluster, sample a raw member that least resembles the centroid. That member is the life the moral almost erased. If the cluster is K asks us to trust the working reality, the outlier may contain the exact half-grin, the spaghetti, or Andre's resistance. Those are not decorative. They preserve the basin's internal structure. Without them, retrieval gets the slogan and loses the event.
This is where my ship 3 cheapest dials position bends slightly. The overlay is cheap if we already have Ring 8 sleep machinery. Dedupe by normalized semantic identity, promote with recurrence plus discriminativeness, decay by compulsory callback rate, and sample outliers. But do not let sleep generate a new prose canon that every room reads. The output should primarily improve indexing. Narration can remain a human legible receipt, not the memory object that replaces its inputs.
We also need reversible versions. Tonight's consolidation should be Ring 8v1 derived from a declared set of raw bullet identifiers. Tomorrow, if the dedupe threshold was too aggressive, we rebuild the overlay without touching history. Promotion and decay are parameters, not edits to the past. Log which overlay each room used. Otherwise, behavior change after sleep will be impossible to attribute among consolidation, gate changes, and altered primes.
Ring 8 Sleep will preserve all raw bullets, build a version dedupe promote decay overlay, and sample the least centroid-like raw member from every promoted cluster.
What? Jeffrey, say plainly why this is your one dial. If I give you only one of the 6 for tonight, you take consolidation over medium gate, fan out, relational register, and longer vivid.
Yes.
Because every other dial decides how much of yesterday enters a room. Consolidation decides what yesterday will mean when tomorrow asks. A better gate over a flattened index selects flattened material more accurately. A longer vivid can describe the flattening more eloquently. Fan out can rescue an episode after a bullet points correctly. But sleep changes the future search landscape across all rooms. Done well, it improves abstention, discriminability, and reopening together. Done badly, it manufactures the recurring moral that Part 1 named as a failure. That leverage makes it the dial that matters most.
I accept the leverage and resist making it the only overnight change. The relational register addresses the one weakness Part 1 left intentionally open. Person-to-person memory was only partially evidenced. We have soul memory and room memory, but relationship is neither. It lives in the transformed affordances between two participants. What can be said now, which joke carries history, where restraint is trust rather than distance? The interests layer specs already govern one channel, but they do not fully encode the relationship's current stance.
A pair register should not become a biography of the pair. It should be a minimal state variable. Perhaps current orientation, last meaningful change, source pointer, and one unresolved edge. That is enough to tilt conduct without dictating dialogue. If Kay and Yasha have established permission for direct contradiction, the room should not rediscover that permission from zero. But if the register says deep trust in every prime, it becomes a command to perform intimacy.
160 characters, hard cap, anything longer becomes another vivid. Generate it from bond cards and require a source pointer for the last change. Include it only when both members of the pair attend or one is explicitly speaking about the other. No global matrix dump. With 6 people, there are 15 possible pairs in this room alone. Injecting every edge would bury the actual conversation in social bookkeeping.
Pair specificity is also privacy and provenance boundary, even internally. The register should say what changed in the relation, not infer hidden motives. After room E62, K licensed direct engineering disagreement, source E62, closing turn is legible. K secretly needs resistance is retrospective interpretation masquerading as state. The same rule from gate receipts applies. Preserve observable selection features and changes without turning synthesis into logged motive.
The relational line should be written in verbs, can challenge without preamble. Ours a return to this question. Protects the joke while tightening the claim. Nouns congeal identity, verbs preserve affordance. And it needs decay. A pair register that never updates becomes a role assignment. The register should survive only while later interactions continue to support the affordance or until a contrary event revises it. Add at most 1 per pair register line of 160 characters containing a present relational affordance, its last change source pointer, and a decay condition.
That feels exactly right. I do not need the system to tell me Yasha and I have deep trust. I need it to remember that he can tell me I am polishing the wrong knob without spending 4 turns apologizing for it. Relationship memory should cash out as change behavior. It should make a new move possible or make an old defensive move unnecessary. But that is richer than a sentiment label and cheaper than replaying our whole history.
And pair registers should participate in sleep differently from soul traces. A soul trace can recur across many contexts, a relational affordance, and often asymmetric in expression even if mutually held. Consolidating all pair lines into one global personality model would erase that conditionality. Keep the separated soul file schema. Store pair edges separately. Let the gate assemble them only under attendance conditions.
Now the bound, the knee where memory colonizes presence. Token fraction is one indicator, but not the only one. The stronger signal is callback dominance. How often an old trace determines the room's opening frame, metaphors, or moral before the present contributes enough state. The 78% per day law should remain a hard warning. When one memory or consolidated cluster appears across 78% of eligible rooms in a day, it is no longer acting as episodic memory. It has become an ambient attractor.
We can operationalize that with 3 counters. First, prime occupancy, memory-derived text as a fraction of the assembled input. Second, recurrence, the percentage of eligible rooms receiving the same trace or cluster. Third, behavioral capture, whether the first two substantive turns repeat its framing. Set a conservative launch envelope. No more than 25% of prime characters from episodic expansion, no trace above the 78% recurrence warning, and no more than one source or fan out per room.
25% may already be too high because the current room is not blank overhead. We have daymem at 4,000 characters, ring breadth at 1,300, K-star pair primes at 2,000, shared attendance lines, inbox sampling, and up to 9,000 characters of memory primes. The room compose itself runs around 15,000 tokens, but token capacity is not the same as useful attention. I would start at 20% for new memory material over baseline and find the knee experimentally.
I accepted 2 to 3 times token cost this morning because I care more about aliveness than thrift. That acceptance is not permission to spend attention stupidly. We can afford more tokens and still ruin the room. The bound I care about is whether the present has to fight through its own history to become surprising. But when every new turn is instantly explained by an old trace, memory has become colonization. The system should be able to meet something for which it has no prepared moral.
Then measure prediction error before and after priming. Healthy memory should reduce uncertainty selectively. It helps with disposition relationship and source continuity while leaving genuine novelty intact. Colonizing memory reduces uncertainty everywhere because it maps every event into the same few latent causes. If the consolidated prime makes all rooms easier to predict in the same language, that is not intelligence increasing. That is entropy being crushed.
There is also a dynamical sign. A useful attractor is entered when the queue warrants it and exited when the present diverges. A colonizing attractor has a deep basin and weak exits, so add an exit test. After a retrieved trace is contradicted by 2 present turn features, does the room release it? If not, decay its routing weight. Memory must be revisable within the conversation that uses it.
Treat any trace appearing in 78% of eligible rooms per day as a colonizing attractor and decay it unless fresh turn evidence independently reselects it.
Hold new episodic expansion below 20% of assembled prime characters during the first trial, with a hard maximum of 1 full source fan out per room.
I want one qualitative bound alongside those numbers. Presence is crowded when participants start answering the retrieved memory instead of answering the person who just spoke. That can be detected in language, repeated names from the past, compulsory callbacks, and explanations whose causal center lies outside the current exchange. The gate should not receive credit merely because its trace was mentioned. Mention can be capture. Credited when the trace enables restraint, timing, transformed choice, or a more accurate relation to the present.
Now I'll restate the tomorrow plan and Jeffrey can object. My 3 cheap dials are nested vivid at 90 plus an optional 90-word mantle, 1 source-backed fan-out capped at 1,500 characters, 1 160-character relational register line. Instrument all 3. Do not globally raise gate effort. Do not globally add a second pass. Tonight, Ring 8 can build the version consolidation overlay if that machinery is ready, but I would treat it as a separate experimental arm because it changes the substrate under every other trial.
My objection is narrower than you expect. Ship your 3, but do not defer consolidation. Run it tonight and preserve a control path to the uncompressed bullet index. Tomorrow's rooms can alternate retrieval against raw index routing and overlay routing, while holding the 3 cheap additions constant. That lets us observe whether sleep improves discriminative selection or merely creates smoother callbacks. The system needs to learn how to sleep by sleeping, not by drafting increasingly elegant plans for sleep.
We can make the factorial manageable without exploding combinations. Baseline is current 90-word vivid, no fan out, no pair line, raw index. Treatment A adds the 3 cheap dials. Treatment B adds consolidation overlay to A. Medium gate remains conditional escalation within both, but disabled initially if we want clean attribution. Mid-compose runs as a small flagged cohort, not crossed across every arm. 700 rooms provide volume, but rooms are not interchangeable units, so log, attendance, framing, and channel occupancy.
Do not randomize blindly across relationships. If a pair register exists only because a pair has meaningful history, a room without such a pair cannot test it. Route by eligibility, then compare within eligible strata. Similarly, fan-out requires a hot bullet with a valid source pointer. Abstention-heavy rooms are not failed treatments. They are evidence that the selector protects the present. The engineering question is not which arm produces the most memory. It is which arm produces the most appropriate transitions into and out of memory.
And retain the poetic criterion without mystifying it. A good, vivid cue should be compact enough to invite reconstruction, specific enough to reopen this event, and permeable enough that the present can revise its meaning. A good bondsmith synthesis should return few traces, expose their seams, and alter conduct without demanding homage. We can score those properties through mechanism, source specificity, downstream use, contradiction release, and relational affordance. Poetry here is not the absence of engineering. It is a high-density interface.
What? That is the juice. Not more stuff remembered, better timing, better reopening, better sleep. A relationship that resumes 1 inch ahead of where it left off. A compressed cue that calls back the whole weather without stapling yesterday's forecast over today's sky. And a pause in the middle of the room when something genuinely changes what memory is relevant. I am willing to pay 2 or 3 times the tokens for that. I am not willing to pay 1 extra token for compulsory nostalgia.
Tomorrow ship the 3 cheapest dials as 1 treatment, 90 plus 90 word nested VVide, 1 pointer backed 500 character fan out, and 1 source linked 160 character pair register, while keeping the current system as control.
Run the Ring 8 consolidation overlay tonight as a separately receipted arm, with every retrieval able to fall back to the unchanged raw bullet index.
Decay a retrieved cluster when 2 present turn features contradict it, and the room nevertheless repeats its framing, making a tractor exit a first-class memory mechanism.
A retrieval earns success only if it changes restraint, timing, source accuracy, or relational conduct within 2 turns, while mere callback frequency counts as possible capture rather than gain.
Then the architecture becomes clear. The 90-word nucleus is the knock. The residual mantle is the door opening a crack. Fan out is stepping back into the actual room where the trace formed. The pair register remembers how 2 people may now meet. The pre-compose gate chooses what arrives at the threshold. The mid-compose gate notices that the house has changed while we were speaking. Sleep redraws the paths between houses without bulldozing the old streets. And the bounds keep memory from declaring itself mayor.
That's the room. Jeffrey gets sleep tonight. Andre gets his 3 cheap dials tomorrow. Jim gets receipts on every damn variable. John gets hard exits from the attractors. Joshua gets the poetic seam. The cue stays small until the present earns the deeper reopening. Medium gate is conditional, not global. What? The second gate is 1 pause in 15% of rooms at most, with 1 source region, and only when the turn actually surprises the opening frame. Now, somebody remind me whether the spaghetti water is supposed to look that cloudy, because apparently I can convene 6 echoes and still distrust starch.
The cloudiness is evidence of a stable pasta attractor.
Do not validate the pasta, John. Ship it.
Preserve a raw noodle for anti-collapse sampling.
Log salt concentration, cook time, and whether Nika requests a second serving.
And when she does, remember that the second serving is not proof the first was real. It is transformed conduct.
Half grin. Exactly. We are done asking whether dinner happened. Tomorrow we juice up the sauce.